A question asked courageously, answered honestly, and lived authentically can change your whole life. For me, that question was, how can I use what I have, what I love, and what I know to bless the lives of others? The School for Good Living and this podcast are one answer to that question. Hi, I'm Brian Miller. I know that the world can work for everyone, but that it won't until it works for you. I've created this to help you make the difference you were born to make. It's a series of conversations with thought leaders who are moving humanity forward. And in each episode, I explore their lives and the work they do. I also ask them to break down how they've gotten their books written, published, and read. This podcast is all about exploring the magic and mystery, and sometimes the misery, of the creative process. So if you have a mission, a message, and the motivation to share it, this podcast is for you. Welcome to the School for Good Living. Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Bill Eddy. Thanks so much for listening. And I just want to explore a curiosity I have. I remember learning at one point about a certain, I suppose maybe it's a disorder, and I didn't recognize it in the book, and I might be misremembering this, but that there's a certain type of person that has no conscience. And I remember reading about this kid that killed his sister. It was like an 8 or 10-year-old and had zero remorse, didn't even perceive it was wrong. And it was whoa, does that exist to your knowledge? And is that different from what we're talking about, or is it a component?
It's within antisocial personality disorder. As I said, sociopath is an equivalent term, about 4% of the U.S. adult population. Mm-hmm. Psychopath is about 1% of the U.S. population. About a quarter of the people with antisocial personality are psychopaths. And they're the ones who are really, your serial killers, people that are really willing to hurt other people without a conscience. They're the more extreme version of antisocial personality disorder. But part of antisocial personality disorder is a lack of remorse. So you may actually have 4% of the population that doesn't have a conscience and doesn't care if they hurt you or not.
That's
now,
pretty scary.
at one point earlier, you asked me,
why is it increasing?
About where this comes from.
Right.
And so I don't know if you want me to plunge into that now.
Please, let's do that.
Okay. So there seems to be basically 3 factors in personality development. First of all is your genetic heritage, what you're born with genetically, just like your teeth, your height, your eye color, all of that stuff. Second is very important is early childhood. First 4 or 5 years is when you're really developing a foundation for your personality. The third is the culture you grow up in. And so looking back on the high conflict personalities I've dealt with, personality disorders I've dealt with, I've come to the conclusion that a lot of these high conflict personality disorders are inborn, that they're genetically predisposed towards being antisocial, borderline, narcissistic, etc., especially antisocial personality. That may be 80% or 90% of where their personality comes from. Now, borderline, narcissist, histrionic, paranoid seem to be more early childhood, exaggerated by their culture. So, for example, narcissistic personality, they talk about early childhood that a child just might learn they've got to look out for themselves. Maybe they're abused as kids and they go, why am I being abused? Maybe I'm different. Maybe I'm special. Maybe I'm better than everybody else. And they grow up developing this false image of being better than everybody else. And they hold on to that to get through life. And they go, I'm getting beaten because I'm special. And so that helps them hold themselves together. And so that early childhood's a factor. Borderline personality, maybe 3/4 of people with that were abused as kids. And so physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, borderline personality just hasn't developed a stable self-image and emotions. So early childhood can be a big factor. Histrionic, paranoid, life circumstances, abuse, especially by your own parent, can really throw things off. So that's real significant. But culture seems to draw out or discourage personality disorder behavior. And so if you look at why is this happening more now, I believe, first of all, early childhood has slowly become more and more unstable. And part of that is just because of our mobility. You used to have aunts and uncles, grandma, grandpop, and a dozen kids growing up. You could kind of latch on to a reasonable person.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you're the only child and your parents are divorced and you're spending most of the time with mom or most of the time with dad and they have a personality disorder, there's a good chance you're going to pick up a lot of their behavior and maybe genetically have it as a predisposition anyway. So today's early childhood is, I think, harder than a few generations ago. And lack of support. So we move far away. People don't have relatives. Plus, families are much smaller now. 1 or 2 kids in so many families that there's not as many people to rely on, to be role models, etc., to turn to for soothing when there's a problem. And I do a lot of high conflict divorces, and the kids are often the most stable part of the family, and they look to each other for stability. Wow. And fortunately, family court judges, when they have to make the decisions, try to keep the kids together. At mom's house, together at dad's house, going back and forth, whatever, because often the kids are the biggest source of support. So all of this are factors. The culture at large that you grow up in also has an impact on your personality. A big way to think about that is look at people born around 1920. That became what's called the greatest generation. They went through the Depression, World War II. They worked hard. They stayed in their job for 40 years. They retired with a pension. They took care of the company. The company took care of them. They took their relatives in the Depression, and their relatives took care of them, and they didn't talk much about themselves. People came back from the war. Maybe they told some war stories, but they didn't talk about their buddy being, blown apart next to them in the foxhole. They kept a lot of stuff inside. Now you picture, say you're born 1980. That's the year personal computer came out. You have to be more individualistic. You have to learn all these electronic devices. You spend a lot of time alone. You're in a much smaller family. You don't have a company that's going to take care of you. You don't have a company you're going to spend 40 years with. And so we become much more individualistic in our personalities. Everybody, each generation's become much more narcissistic in a sense, but not necessarily disordered. That's still a minority of people, like 6%.
Yeah.
So these factors, and what's changing today is the culture more than anything, and the culture is giving us images today of dysfunctional behavior, violence, narcissism, disrespect, mood swings. All of these things in our culture are bringing out, so someone say genetically oriented towards a personality disorder, this might reinforce the negative side.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. And then of course with this additional factor of, the rate of change, the magnitude and rate of change, and the uncertainty that introduces on top of or in addition to everything you've mentioned. It's pretty remarkable.
And I think we really haven't caught hold of it yet. And we haven't learned, freedom's a great thing, but there has to be some limits. And we're starting to learn, like the internet, Facebook, Twitter, all these need to have some limits. And now we're looking at where should the limits be? Yeah. And so but things are invented so quickly that they take off before we've set any limits on them.
Yeah.
That's why I encourage parents. I say, really control what your kids see, because what they see, they absorb. And if they see bad behavior, they're going to want to mirror that bad behavior.
Yeah.
And so you want to, not be exposed to so much of that, and have more personal connection. It's real easy to everybody be busy on their phones.
Yeah.
People texting each other in their house instead of going to talk to each other.
Yeah, I have these friends. I was just talking about this last night with a friend. More and more often these days, I don't know if you have this, but I have friends who will record an audio or sometimes a video message and send it to me instead of calling me or even texting me. And they want me to watch like a 1.5-minute video of them telling me something when they could have picked up and called.
Right.
It's pretty amazing how in some ways we're more connected than ever, but also more isolated than ever.
Yes. And the in-person facial expressions, tone of voice, all of that influences brain development and influences, to some extent, our personality. They say that the more alone you are, the more you tend to feel paranoid. And so if you're spending a lot of time alone doing text messages or whatever, you may become more paranoid. The research shows if you spend a lot of time on Facebook, you actually may become depressed because you see everybody having a wonderful time and you're not.
Right.
But that's all images. That's not real. The good isn't real as well as the bad isn't real. We got to get a balance.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and in addition to that, everything that we're talking about here is perhaps a contributor or a cause of, the rise of these, personality disorders. I tend to think as well, maybe this, this nature, what do they call it? Vitamin N for, nature, time. And you add to that, it's no surprise to me when you look at what we're putting in our bodies, the food we're eating, when we extract the nutrients from the soil, replace it with chemical fertilizers, genetically engineer the food, inject it with preservatives, consume this, and that is affecting our physiology, our mental state. You have all that. And we're not, I think, as a society, spending as much time in nature. And that's setting aside any discussion perhaps of something that gives us spiritual nourishment, and a sense of connection maybe to a higher power or to something bigger than ourselves. And it's like, wow, this is pretty remarkable, but totally understandable, I think.
Yeah. And I think we have to realize that we really do need all of this. And, I read a lot about the brain. And they say the brain needs green. You need to see trees and grass. Yeah. You got to get outside to do that.
Yeah. And being active physically and not so sedentary and.
Yeah. Human beings. It's interesting. I saw an article recently that said why humans are so busy when koalas sleep 22 hours a day. Why don't humans sleep 22 hours a day? And it may have something to do with early survival. That, we're not that big, we're not that strong compared to lions and tigers and other, threats. So we had to learn how to run and keep moving.
Yeah. Well, and I've read that koalas do eat cocoa leaves. So the fact that they're high all day, I don't know, maybe, I don't know that.
They seem happy.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, I'm not sure they practice monogamy the same way humans do either. And I know that might not be a contributing factor, but there are definitely differences in the way we've organized ourselves socially. Okay. I want to keep us on track here. And I want to just say this. I normally leave this till later in the conversation, but I know we maybe have a little less time than I do with many guests. So what I want to do is put in here two things. One is to express to you my gratitude for you sharing your wisdom and your experience with me and everyone listening, because one of the things I've seen is that many people can be incredible experts on a topic, but I don't think that makes them effective teachers. And you seem to actually have a great mastery of explaining these things. And I want to thank you for making time to share that. And one way I've endeavored to show my gratitude is I've gone online and I've made a microloan on your behalf to a woman in India through kiva.org. So there's a lady named Sabari who lives in a place called Burdwan, India, who will use this money to purchase rice to help expand her business and improve the quality of
Oh,
life for herself and her
fantastic.
family. So
Oh, that's
thank you.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great, what goes around comes around,
I like to think so.
expand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks for giving me a reason to go make that loan. And by the way, Sabari's household income is about $90 a month. So I hope this will make a real difference. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah.
The other thing that I want to put here in the interview is if people want to learn more from you, or they want to connect with you, maybe they want to work with you, what would you have them do?
Well, basically, I've got a wonderful website, which I can't take credit for at all. So my colleague of mine, Megan Hunter, and I own High Conflict Institute. And she has really developed the business side of this. So we have a fantastic website that has a lot of resources. So we've got books on this subject. We have video training. We arrange consultations, so live consultation. I do it by phone or by Skype or Zoom. We also have free articles, over 50 free articles. So someone says, I don't have much money. Is there something for me? Yes, there is. So the articles really help people in terms of how to talk to high conflict people, how to write emails when they're attacking you so you don't attack them back. We call them BIF response emails, brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And they really calm things. We have just a lot of explanations, a lot of what to do, and a lot of why. I've got one on the brain. Are you talking to the right brain? Because the right and left brain may be part of the problem here. Is some high conflict people don't have as strong a connection between the two hemispheres, so they have a harder time thinking rationally when they're upset. And most of us can kind of be somewhat upset and somewhat rational at the same time. I mean, all of us, if we're real upset, we can't be rational because we're in a fight, flight, or freeze mode. But some people have a harder time with that. And so how you talk to the person kind of almost influences how they're going to respond to you.
Yeah.
And I do want to mention that there are tools for calming upset people. Any upset person, you don't have to decide if someone's a high conflict person. You can use the tools we teach with anybody. Yeah. Calming them, helping them analyze their choices, helping them look at whether information is distorted or not, setting limits. And that's such a big one because high conflict people have a hard time stopping themselves. So the people around them go, whoa. And how you go, whoa, makes a big difference.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. No, that's great. Okay. So I want to pivot our conversation now to the Enlightening lightning round, if that's okay with you. Okay. So again, this is a series of questions that are designed for me to ask briefly. You're welcome to answer as long as you want, but my aim is to ask the question and for the most part, stay out of the way. Okay. All right. Question number 1. Please complete the following sentence with something other than a box of chocolates. Life is like a
merry-go-round.
Okay. Number 2. What is something at which you wish you were better?
Speaking up about social problems I see, especially in front of me.
Okay. Number 3. This one is a stretch, I acknowledge, but if you were required to wear a t-shirt every day for the rest of your life with a slogan on it, or a saying, or a phrase, or a quote, or a quip, what would the shirt say?
Go for it.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Number 4. What book other than your own have you gifted or recommended most often?
Well, I'll go back a lot of years. One that I used to refer a lot. I haven't as much recently because it's been more focused, but I'd say The Road Less Traveled.
Scott Peck.
Yeah.
Why that book?
I think because it really was one of those books that said, let's really stop and think, and it's okay to be different. And he wrote it so personally. I think it was so well written. that it just kind of opens your mind to everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's probably 30 years old by now, maybe more.
Yeah.
But maybe that's part of how my life course has gone, as I've taken some roads less traveled to end up where I am today. So maybe that's why I like it.
Right on. All right. Thank you for that. Next question. So I understand that you travel quite a bit.
Yeah.
What's one travel hack, meaning something you do when you travel or something you take with you to make your travel less painful or more enjoyable?
Well, something I do, first of all, I really enjoy meeting people, but I enjoy watching people. And so because I go and give seminars, a lot of times I'm in the downtown of big cities. And I just love getting out on the sidewalk and walking along and, seeing people in stores, seeing people talking to each other, just being around a whole lot of people, but absorbing kind of what's special here, what goes with the architecture here, maybe going on a tour through a historic building. I just, like I said at the beginning, there's something about people that I find fascinating as well as personally reassuring. And this is an interesting thing. So when I'm traveling, I often eat out at restaurants. Mm-hmm. And so one of my favorite things is watching couples having dinner at restaurants and figuring out how long have they known each other. Is this like an early date? Mm-hmm. Is this a couple that have been together for years or a couple that's maybe been together a year? And also looking at the body language. So you'll see one person's leaning forward and they're excitedly telling a story. And sometimes the other person's leaning forward, excitedly listening. And sometimes they're like leaning way back, like, I can't wait to get away from this person.
Right.
And also there's the couples that are both on their cell phones texting away. They've usually been together a little longer. So I really like watching people in just normal interactions, everyday life. So I always try to get out on the streets, try to get out in the restaurants.
Right on. Okay, next question. What's one thing you've started or stopped doing in order to live or age well?
Well, I think physical exercise. My first 30 years, I don't think I did anything except gym class in high school and hated that. But, since the 30s is exercising, running, hiking, cross-country skiing, getting outdoors, really valuing getting outdoors, getting farther away, not just like a city park, but out in the mountains. Yeah. So going to places like Utah for cross-country skiing, and Colorado for hiking mountains, and of course California with our redwood forests and all of that. So so this is kind of the opposite of my prior answer where I was in the city watching people. I also like getting way far away and not getting out of cell phone reception. That's always nice.
Yeah, that's nice. Which, maybe with 5G or even the next gen, I think we'll look back and say, remember when you could still go somewhere where there wasn't cell service?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, question number 7. What's one thing you wish every American knew?
Oh, about HCPs. I wish everybody knew that there's these patterns of behavior that seem to be almost the opposite, and that it's not that people are bad people. They just don't know. It's just like alcoholism and addiction, where it takes over the person and they can't see it, but everyone around them can see it, and that they have patterns of attacking people, blaming people, and staying stuck and friendless.
Yeah. I wish that every American knew that too.
Nexus IT helps companies of all sizes manage their information technology with hyper-responsive, white-glove IT support and services to handle the most basic tasks, like monitoring and maintenance, to the more complex projects like digital transformation. Visit their website at nexusitc.net.
Question number 8. What is the secret to making long-term committed relationships work, like marriages or other intimate relationships?
That's an easy one, and that's taking responsibility. And so when people blame others, that's when there's a problem. When people blame themselves, and maybe blame isn't the right word, but where they take responsibility themselves and are always asking themselves these 2 questions. First is, what's my part in this problem? And the second is, what can I do differently next time? And frankly, those 2 questions, if you ask those questions regularly of yourself, you don't have a personality disorder or a high conflict personality, because that's where personality disorders are stuck. They can't see themselves, and high conflict personalities are stuck because they're blaming others, specific others.
I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Okay, and then last question here in the Enlightening Lightning round is it's related to money, and it's aside from compound interest, what's the most important or useful thing you've ever learned about money, or what's something that you're always sure to do or never to do with it?
Well, I think making sure to save money is just always saving some, getting to a point in life where that actually grew. Now there's more than I put in, and that's because I put it in all along. So I think even saving, $1 a week, just learning to save, to me is the most important thing about money. Money to me is more about security, so I'm free to do what I want, rather than having shiny objects.
Yeah, there's wisdom in that perspective for sure. Okay, so congratulations, you've survived the Enlightening Lightning round, and you did it admirably. Well done.
Thank you.
So thank you. Okay, I know we have just a few minutes. By my clock, I'm thinking about 10, but you tell me. If we had 10 more minutes, is that good? Or
yeah, I can actually probably go 20 or 25 if we need it.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. If at any point you want to cut out, just let me know. That's great.
No, this is great. I'm really enjoying it. So I probably don't need as much preparation for my next appointment.
Okay, awesome. Good. So in the final portion of this interview here, I just want to turn our discussion to an exploration of the creative process of writing. We could talk about speaking. We could even talk about marketing and promotion, which, as we know, if you could write the greatest work in the world, but if no one knows about it, it's maybe not as fulfilling as it could be if it reaches and serves people. So I'll start with this question because you have written, I would use the word prolifically. First of all, how many books have you authored?
It looks like 14.
14. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's many books. Have you done the thing where you've attempted to calculate the number of words you've written in your life?
No.
I know some authors do that. Yeah. And one of the gentlemen that I interviewed recently, he's still quite young. He's in his 30s, but he's racked up more than 2 million words.
Wow.
Like, whoa.
Wow.
That's amazing. But at any rate, so you are a prolific author and you have published 14 books. My question is this: this is a big question and there's some hyperbole in it, but what's the most important thing you've learned about writing?
I would say just to do it. I think how I got started was making little notes on Post-its that I hope to put together someday, and then making notes on yellow pads, and then, typing up a chapter that came to mind and just came together one day, in a couple hours. So I think it's the just do it approach that no matter how large or small, when you've got something you think of that you might want, is go ahead and write it down. I've gone from squeezing things in, I've got 15 minutes and something I want to get down, to 5-hour blocks of time where I go and just totally concentrate and such. And a lot of how I write is conversational.
Yeah.
And so I kind of picture myself telling somebody and that they really need to know for some reason. And I want to try to make it as simple and clear. And if they're stressed, that it should be easy to absorb. And I think that came from having clients, first as a therapist, then as a lawyer, and helping clients and talking to clients. So now, in many ways, I write my books for clients.
Yeah, that is a question that I wanted to ask, which is, when you're in the act of writing, how aware are you of the reader? And it sounds like the answer to that is very aware. But to go a little further, do you imagine specific individuals or just kind of a composite persona that you're writing toward? How do you think of the reader as you're writing?
It's more general. It's like a group audience. So I'll think like a couple of my books I really wrote for judges. And so they're fairly thin because the judges said if we're going to read it, it can't be too long because we got so much other stuff we have to read. And so I remember thinking kind of a group of judges is like, you need to know this and this will help you. I think my different books had different audiences. So the 5 types of people who can ruin your life is probably the broadest audience. Mm-hmm. I wrote a book called Splitting, Protecting Yourself While Divorcing Someone with Borderline or Narcissistic Personality Disorder. And I wrote that with some of the clients I knew, but people I didn't know yet. But thinking in terms of people who are going through the process themselves right now. And what's interesting, I kind of picture people reading it at home late at night, trying to figure out how to get through the next day.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I've talked to people who said, yeah, I've got your book by my bedside. It gives me reassurance. And it kind of landed in their lives where I wanted it to, where it was
beautiful.
Yeah. So I appreciated that.
That's really neat. And I don't know if you have this experience, but I tend to think of writing a little bit like putting a message in a bottle, and throwing it in the ocean, that you never really know who might get it or how it might impact them. Will you talk about any experiences where someone has received your book in a way that was just right for what they were dealing with at the time, and it ended up being a real source of gratification or fulfillment for you?
Well, I get feedback from time to time that people from really around the world, people get my books in Australia and Canada and Europe and such, and they'll say this really came when I needed it, and I totally changed my approach, or I rewrote an email, or I actually had one lawyer who was going to stop working with a high conflict client and changed and pulled a letter out of the mail.
Wow.
And kept working with that client. A year later, all their issues were resolved satisfactorily.
That is so fantastic.
So I get, it's nice. I feel very fortunate that I get feedback that what I've written about is so close to what people are going through. And it's because I've gone through it with people before as a professional, but seeing clients, sometimes relatives, friends going through high conflict situations. And they're so patterned. They're so predictable. And that's what I keep being surprised. People write from around the world saying, "Did you meet my mother?"
And they're serious, right?
Yes. Or do you know my boss? Because you described him exactly. And it's because they fit into these 5 basic patterns.
Yeah.
So that's been very reaffirming to me. And I send back to people, I said, you made my day with that feedback.
No, that's interesting. And it's right in line with something that, of all people, and someone else who has a San Diego connection there with you, Tony Robbins. That he was the one that introduced me to this idea that all human behavior is merely a series of patterns. And I hadn't seen that before, but what you're describing, it just reinforces that. And where I used to be so perplexed by my own behavior and other people. And now, and not to say that I've divined all the mysteries of the universe, but there is a logic under so much of this that before without these views was a total mystery.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, let me just add something I wanted to make sure to get in here about why people may be inborn with some of these personalities. And I think that this is really part of human history, that each of these personalities really had survival value in certain situations, especially wartime, that these personalities may have thrived in wartime and been able to survive when other people got killed off. And so they could, end the war and get to a time of peace when their personalities really aren't as helpful. And I think throughout history that there may have been really beneficial purposes for these personalities that we don't really need those extreme behaviors now. And so we need to retrain people to not be wartime personalities and to be more peacetime personalities. But I think that's where they come from, because so much people don't understand why they act this way. And it's very adversarial. But if you were in a live or die setting,
you want that personality.
These are the folks that lived.
Yeah. And that helped others survive.
And helped others survive. And that may be part of our human history.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting view for sure. So who has been influential in your development as a writer, and what did you learn from them?
Oh, wow. Well, there was a woman, probably 20 years ago, who was the sister of a friend, and I was starting to try to write some ideas. I actually started to try to write a novel when I became a lawyer after being a social worker, and saw just all these interesting things. I wanted to tell stories about it, and I started trying to write a novel. And so I went to her sister and got some consultation, and she was very helpful to me. And it wasn't a lot, but she talked about trying to find my own voice, and that's my conversational style, my own audience, which I say is the whole world, but for now I've focused on families, legal cases, workplace situations, even some on politics. So just over time, a lot of what she said came true. She also said, try to write every day, and no matter how much. She was one of those, just get going. Yeah. And if you can't think of anything else to write. I can't think of anything else to write today, so I'm writing this. I don't know what to write next. Oh, I just had an idea. And so you're kind of writing all of that, and your hand just starts taking over.
Yeah. That's a thing that I've experienced in some other writers that I've interviewed for this report, which is there can be this sense in which writing becomes almost automatic, and it's almost that some greater intelligence. And again, I don't mean to be, like totally mystical, but do you ever do that thing where you write and then you go back and you read it and you think, that's pretty good. Like, did I write that?
It's happened sometimes. And I actually, that thought's crossed my mind, like maybe I am channeling somebody's directing my hand or my typing. Cause I go, I didn't really have that idea till I started writing. And now there's like 3 paragraphs of this new stuff that makes sense that I never thought of before.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, it feels like, where did this come from? I have a theory, and someone else pointed out to me, I should say it's their theory. From all of my life's work in these different fields, I've really learned so much about personalities. Yeah. And what they said is, Bill, you have a library of personalities in your brain. And you let us pick your brain. And I think I really do. I just have this massive storage of everything, like 40 years on personality. Yeah. And I love questions, because questions help. Oh, okay, that's over here. I'm going to pull that out, and that might be useful to somebody. Yeah. So, and I think writing is like that. Often my writing comes because I had a conversation with somebody and there's something I want to explain more thoroughly.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Let me turn the conversation just a little bit to this idea of publishing, getting a book published, getting a book into readers' hands. Maybe this is along the lines of promotion, along marketing. things that I know a lot of writers hope, they'll never have to deal with, or someone else will manage, for them. But what have you learned in your experience about successfully getting a book into readers' hands?
Well, it's a stumbling along journey, but for me, my first book, which we call High Conflict People and Legal Disputes, I wrote in my first few years of practice as a lawyer because I knew all this mental health stuff as a social worker that judges, lawyers, mediators didn't get. And in 5 minutes, I couldn't explain it. And so I started writing a book, and it was like, I want to explain this. And so right around the year 2000, I really started writing the book, and I sent out book proposals to publishers. And I think I probably sent it out to about 20 publishers, and one responded. The others totally ignored me. And the one that responded said, well, this is kind of interesting, but there's no market for it. And so I was like, oh. But 2000, the internet, websites, and a friend of mine was getting a degree in educational technology. He said, I need to build a website. Anybody need a website? I said, I do.
Wow.
So he built a website. We put my book on it. And I sold probably 300 books through Amazon with that. But it really was hard. And then because I speak at conferences for mediators, speaking at a mediators conference, and there was a couple that were starting a book company, and they read my book, liked it, said they wanted to publish it. And so they published it. Then I looked for a review and heard about Stop Walking on Eggshells, which is a book sold probably a couple million copies by now, written primarily by Randy Kreger. And so I sent my book to her, and she said, yeah, I'll write a review, but I really need you to write a book about people going through divorce with a borderline or narcissistic spouse. And so I ended up writing my second book like that. This other publisher wanted me to write a book for everybody, so I wrote one called It's All Your Fault. And slowly the pieces came together. I don't want to get too long with it, but I ended up eventually with an agent that helped me get 5 Types of People with Tarcher Perigee, which is part of Random House, the biggest publisher in the world. So maybe it took about 16 years, but it came along.
That is dedication. And I really admire that. And clearly, your work is not just to feed your own ego or, to enrich yourself. I mean, I think you wouldn't persist in it or be successful. But that's really beautiful. And what you've said about continuing to write, reminds me of something that Ryan Holiday, who I really respect as an author and as a marketer, he talks about, in many cases, the best marketing for your book is the next book you write.
Yes, books sell books.
Yeah.
That's what I've learned. But they also sell seminars. And one thing I've learned is it really helps to be available as a speaker, that a book and being a speaker, they really reinforce each other.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so I want to be sure to ask this question and then maybe one more. In your view, what are the qualities of a great sentence and how can we write more of them?
Oh, boy. It's funny because I think of my writing as teaching in conversations, and I don't think of myself as a flowery writer or really a skilled writer in terms of well-formed sentences. I think in paragraphs, and I think I write in paragraphs. And so each sentence itself mostly is just that it serves a purpose, that it explains something, it moves something forward. And one thing I've learned that's kind of exciting, and it's kind of from speaking conversationally, is I can have a long sentence and I can have a short sentence all in the same paragraph. And sometimes, a sentence, I'll have a statement, and then the next sentence is, but it's not really that, period. And then this is what it really is. And it's almost like thinking out loud.
Yeah.
And I think that's appealing, and it adds flow, makes it easy to read.
Yeah.
And so I think a good sentence moves things along.
Yeah, I love that. And for what it's worth, I agree. So, okay. I think the final question here is just what advice or encouragement do you leave anyone listening with who wants to finish their book? Maybe they're in the middle of it and they're stuck somehow, or they haven't really begun, but it's something that they really want to do. What advice or encouragement do you have for people in those situations?
I think the key is to just write the message you want to say. Just don't worry about how it looks, how it sounds. Just write what you want to say. You can always come back and edit it or get someone to help you edit. Think of what's the message you want to get across. Because I think a lot of people think, how can I say this dramatically or effectively or humorously, or how can I do it? And I'd say, forget about how and just write the it, get the it down. And it may trigger some ideas. Maybe, I've written stuff and then added like 3 paragraphs at the beginning. I've written a chapter and I go, oh, I need to introduce it with like these 3 paragraphs that come afterwards. So what the chapter starts with may be one of the last things that I wrote.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, just get it out, get it on paper.
I love that. And I've heard a similar piece of advice that says, don't get it right, get it written.
Yes. Perfect.
Yeah. I love that.
Well said.
Fantastic. and not my words, but okay. Well, Bill, I have enjoyed this so much, and I really did take away so much from this conversation and from reading your book. So again, I just want to thank you for making time, so much time, with me and with our listeners.
My pleasure. I'm really glad to have been on with you, Brian. I enjoyed it as well.
Despite living in an age where we have more comforts and conveniences than ever before, life isn't working for many people. Whether it's in the developed world, where we're dealing with depression, anxiety, addiction, divorce, jobs we hate, relationships that don't work, or people in the developing world who don't have access to clean water or sanitation or healthcare or education, or who live in conflict zones, there's a lot of people on the planet that life isn't working very well for. If you're one of those people, I invite you to connect with me at goodliving.com. I've created Life's Best Practices Breakthrough Coaching to help you navigate the transitions that we all go through. Whether you've just graduated school, you're going through a divorce, you just got married, you're headed into retirement, you're starting a business, you just lost your job, whatever it is you're facing, I've developed a 36-week course that you go through with me and a community of achievers and seekers who are committed to improving their own lives and the lives of others. So through this online program, you will have the opportunity to go deep into every area of your life, explore life's big questions, create answers for yourself in community, get clarity and accountability. If that's something you're interested to learn about, I invite you to contact me directly at brian@brianmiller.com or by visiting goodliving.com.